I discovered the notification for my meeting with Jared Prescott just as I was about to leave for lunch. The red exclamation point in the corner of the calendar hinted at an urgency I hadn't expected on a normal Thursday. 15 minutes, CEO's office, mandatory. Even the signature was succinct. DP, without the usual corporate pleasantries. Another layoff? Thompson of Finance tossed back his pen and leaned back in his chair. Third one this month. Our new boss had gotten serious about cleaning up. I shrugged, closing files on the computer. It's just a meeting for now, Cliff. Yeah, and I'm just a regular accountant. Thompson raised an eyebrow skeptically. All these 15-minute meetings end the same way. You should pack your personal belongings ahead of time, Holloway. The office was humming. Ever since Prescott had replaced Old Man Phelps, Bluestone Technologies had been feverish. Phelps was old school. To him, employees were family. Prescott, on the other hand, with his MBA from Wharton and experience at three tech giants, brought with him a philosophy of efficiency and rationalization. I checked the time, 10 to 2. The meeting is set for 3. If Thompson was right, I had an hour to prepare for the worst. I opened a drawer and pulled out a family photo taken at the Mid-Autumn Festival in Chinatown 3 years ago. Dad looked tired but happy. For him to lose his job at his age was a disaster, but he had raised me differently. Marcus, a man with tongues will never be lost. I glanced at the stack of documents for the upcoming negotiations with the Shanghai delegation. Our entire department had worked on them, but I was the only one who knew the Cantonese dialect the partners insisted on. Prescott didn't care, though. To him, we were all interchangeable parts of a huge machine. At 2:50, I took the elevator to the 27th floor. Prescott's secretary, Audrey Mayfield, pointed with a perfect smile to a chair by the door. "Mr. Prescott is running late. Would you wait, please?" I nodded. A common tactic. Make me wait. Show my superiority. Linda Wu from our department came rushing down the hallway, clutching files to her chest. When she saw me, she slowed down. "Marcus? Are you here to see him too?" "A private audience," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. Linda gave me a sympathetic look. "He went through our files yesterday. He asked about the department's language competencies. And what did you say?" "The truth, that I speak Mandarin and you've started learning German." I suppressed a sigh. Technically, it was true. I had indeed started German classes last month, but that I was fluent in 4 dialects of Chinese, including the rare Cantonese, Korean, and Japanese, Linda didn't know. No one in our company did. I kept this information to myself, not out of secrecy, but out of experience. Too often my language skills had turned me from a contract specialist into a full-time translator for my superiors. At 3 hours and 2 minutes, the office door swung open. Jared Prescott, 45, with a flawless tan and a $400 haircut, made an inviting gesture. "Holloway? Come in." Prescott's office was in stark contrast to Phelps's cozy chaos. Minimalism, chrome, glass, and perfect order. No family photos, just awards and certificates on the walls. He pointed me to a chair across from his massive desk. "I appreciate the punctuality," Prescott said, even though he was late himself. "Thank you for meeting me," I replied neutrally. He opened the thin folder with my name on it. Marcus Holloway, 32 years old, with the company for 5 years and 3 months, International Contracts Division. He looked up. "You're currently preparing the documentation for the Chinese delegation, correct?" "Yes, sir. The Shanghai delegation arrives Sunday. Negotiations begin Monday." Prescott nodded, flipping through the pages. "I see here that you've begun studying German. How are you progressing?" "Basic," I admitted, "but it's good enough for documentation work." "Linda Wu speaks fluent Mandarin," I replied cautiously. I was silent. There was no information about my actual language skills in the folder, and I wasn't about to reveal it now. "I've studied your performance numbers for the last 3 quarters," Prescott continued. "They're below the department average. The number of contracts processed is 18% lower than your peers. International contracts are more complex and time-consuming," I countered. "Nevertheless," he said, "as we streamline the company, we have to rethink the role of each employee." He slammed the folder shut. "Marcus, there's no room for incompetence at Bluestone Technologies. I want people who add real value. That's it." Without even saying it directly, it was clear I was being fired. I felt a twinge inside, but I kept a cool expression on my face. "When do I have to vacate my desk?" "By the end of the day. Human resources will prepare all the necessary paperwork." He's already turned his back to the computer, signaling the conversation is over. "What about the Chinese delegation?" I asked. "We'll hire an interpreter. Los Angeles is full of people who speak Chinese. We can handle it. You're free to go." I stood up, feeling strangely calm. "Good luck on Monday, Mr. Prescott." He lifted his head, a flicker of irritation in his eyes for a moment. "That won't be necessary." As I went down to my floor, I knew what awaited me. Thompson and a few other colleagues were standing at my desk with sympathetic expressions on their faces. "Sorry, buddy," Thompson said. "We're on our way to O'Malley's for a memorial pint. Do you want to join us?" "Later," I said. "I need to pack first." I methodically emptied my desk drawers, putting the few personal belongings I had into a cardboard box. 5 years of my life fit into one box. Ironic. Linda was the last to arrive when most had already dispersed. "It's not fair," she said quietly. "You're one of the best people in the department, but not the most effective, according to Prescott. He doesn't understand anything." Linda shook her head. "What are you going to do about the Chinese delegation? You have all the materials." I handed her a folder of documents. "You have them now." Linda bit her lip. "Maybe we should talk to Douglas. He's the vice president. He could—" "No," I said. "The decision's been made. I'm leaving." At 5 hours and 30 minutes, I left the Bluestone Technologies building, perhaps forever. Instead of joining my co-workers at the bar, I headed home, to a small apartment on the outskirts of Chinatown. It wasn't the most upscale neighborhood, but I loved it for the atmosphere that reminded me of my childhood. I had grown up here, among the narrow streets with red lanterns and signs in Chinese. My adoptive father, a third-generation Chinese immigrant, ran a small spice shop. He never forced me to learn Chinese. I absorbed the language on my own, playing with the neighborhood kids. By the age of 12, I was fluent in Cantonese and Mandarin, and by 16, I had mastered Shanghai and Hakka. Languages came easily to me, opening doors to different worlds. In college, I added Japanese and Korean to my arsenal, but only listed English on my resume. Experience taught me that employers exploit language skills without paying extra. It was easier to keep those skills to myself and use them as needed. At home, I opened a bottle of beer and sat on the small balcony looking out at the lights of the city. Phone. A message from Wei Chen, my childhood friend. He now owned a small travel firm specializing in Chinese tourists. "Marcus, what's up, bro? Long time no see." His energetic voice cheered me up a bit. "Hey, Wei. Yeah, it's been a while. Weekend. Why are you so glum? Did something happen?" I sighed. "I got fired today." "What? Really? You're in charge of the Chinese." I was. The new CEO doesn't know about it. He thought a professional agency would do a better job. "What an asshole," Terry said, genuinely indignant. "So what's it gonna be?" "I don't know. I'm gonna look for a job." "Listen, help me out. I've got some clients here, some bigwigs from China. They need a translator for a visit 5 days starting Monday. They're paying good money. They're flying in Sunday night, pick them up at the airport, that sort of thing. I've already booked a hotel. I'll text it to you." My phone chirped with a message from Wei. I went to bed earlier than usual, but I couldn't sleep for a long time. My mind was spinning with thoughts of Monday and the Chinese delegation. Part of me gloated, imagining the failure of the meeting. The other part was worried about the project I had been working on for the past few months and worried about my former colleagues. In the morning, after a jog and a quick breakfast, I headed to Wei's agency to finalize some details of the upcoming work. Wei met me at the entrance, energetic and smiling as always. "Marcus!" He clapped me on the shoulder. "I'm glad you came. Coffee?" We walked into his office, littered with souvenirs from around the world and photos of landmarks. He pulled a folder out of his desk drawer. "I need a chaperone for a group of Chinese businessmen. They arrive on Sunday. They'll be here for 5 days. The standard program, meeting them at the airport, accommodation at the hotel, escorting them to business meetings." He handed me a folder. "Payment as usual, plus a bonus for urgency." I opened the folder and froze. On the first page was a list of delegates, and first on it was Liu Bingwen, the head of the delegation from Shanghai, with whom Bluestone was to work. I looked up at Wei. "This is the delegation." Wei raised an eyebrow. "They booked the tour through our agency. It's common practice for them to combine business with a little vacation." He winked. "I thought you might be interested." I flipped through the documents. A delegation of 5 people, all high-ranking managers of the Shanghai Technology Corporation. The first item on their program for Monday is a meeting at Bluestone Technologies. "Do you realize what this means?" I asked. "That fate is giving you a chance to watch your former boss flounder without an interpreter?" Wei laughed. "Yeah, I can understand that. The question is, are you ready to take the job?" I wondered. On the one hand, it was an opportunity to see Prescott face the consequences of his decision. On the other, professional ethics dictated that I should warn my former colleagues. "They'll recognize me," I finally said. "So? You'll be there as a Golden Dragon representative, not as a former Bluestone employee." Wei shrugged. "You don't have to help them. Just do your job, escort the delegation." I closed the folder. "Okay, I'll do it." "Good." Wei clapped his hands together. "Meet me at the airport on Sunday, 17:30, the flight from Shanghai." He extended his hand to me. "Welcome to my team, Marcus." Sunday was unusually sweltering for Los Angeles. I arrived at the airport an hour before the Chinese delegation arrived, a habit from my days at Bluestone Technologies. Wei had always joked about my punctuality, saying that in the travel business, flexibility was more important than accuracy, but today I couldn't afford to be late. The international arrivals terminal was buzzing with life. Tourists, businessmen, greeters, all mingled into a motley crowd. I took a strategic position opposite the gate where the passengers of the flight from Shanghai were to appear, and held up a sign with the Golden Dragon logo and the words SHTC Delegation. Next to me, other drivers and escorts lined up with similar placards, a veritable parade of greetings. A loudspeaker announced the arrival of the flight. All that was left was to wait for the passengers to go through passport control and get their luggage. I looked up the information on the delegation members that Wei had provided. 5 people, all senior executives from the Shanghai Technology Corporation. I knew them, not personally, but from their documents. Liu Bingwen, 54 years old, head of the delegation and vice president of international development. Zhang Mei Hua, 49 years old, chief financial officer. Sun Wyman, 38 years old, technical director. And 2 assistants, Huang Tao and Yin Lili, both in their early 30s. It was another 40 minutes before the first passengers began to appear in the arrivals hall. I scrutinized the faces, comparing them with the photos in the documents. Finally, I noticed them, a group of 5 men in business suits, confidently rolling their suitcases toward the gate. They were distinguished by a certain detachment and a manner characteristic of businessmen. I raised the sign higher and stepped forward. Liu Bingwen, a gray-haired man with a commanding face, was the first to notice me and pointed to the others. They headed in my direction. "Good evening," I said in English as they approached. "My name is Marcus Holloway, and I represent the Golden Dragon Travel Agency. Welcome to Los Angeles." Liu gave me an appraising look and replied in heavily accented English. "Thank you. Long flight." I helped them with their luggage and we headed for the gate where a minivan was waiting for us. As we walked along, the Chinese were talking softly among themselves in Cantonese. "I hope the hotel isn't too far away," Sun Weiman said. "After 14 hours on an airplane, all I want to do is shower and sleep." "And I need to check the materials for tomorrow's meeting," Yin Lily replied. "They say that the Americans from Bluestone have prepared a contract with special conditions." I held back a smile. They did not suspect that I understood every word. It often happened in my practice. People spoke freely, believing that no one understood them. We got to the minivan and I helped place the luggage. When everyone was seated, I got behind the wheel and turned to the passengers. "The trip to the hotel will take about 40 minutes, depending on traffic," I said in English. "If you need anything on the way, let me know." "Water, please," Liu Bingwen said. I opened the refrigerator built in between the front seats and took out bottles of water. "Please. There are also juices and light snacks." As we pulled onto the freeway, the conversation in the cabin resumed. This time the Chinese were discussing tomorrow's negotiations in more detail. "I hear that their new CEO is very aggressive in doing business," Zhang Meihua remarked in Cantonese. "I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to change the terms at the last minute." "That's their style," Liu Bingwen nodded. "But we will not concede on key points, especially the timing of implementation." Sun Weiman shook his head. "The problem is that they don't understand the specifics of our market. Their technology needs to be adapted, and that takes time and money. We have to be very careful in negotiations." "Still," Yin Lily sighed, "I think we should negotiate in Cantonese. The pauses in translation will give us more time to think about their proposals." "According to their international department, no one speaks Cantonese," Liu replied. "There is one employee who speaks Mandarin, but we insisted on Cantonese. It does give us a certain advantage." They laughed softly, and I smiled involuntarily, looking at the road. Their tactic was clear: to use the language barrier as a strategic advantage. It gave them time to mull over answers while the translator worked, and the opportunity to discuss nuances right as they negotiated. The hotel where Wen had booked rooms was on the very border of Chinatown. The main thing in choosing the hotel was that the owner was also Chinese. As we drove past the familiar Chinatown neighborhoods, I heard Huang Tao remark, "Typical American Chinatown, like a movie set." "Don't judge harshly," I replied in flawless Cantonese without turning around. "Our Chinatown preserves over 150 years of Chinese immigration history. Behind the facades of tourist shops lies the real life of the community." There was a surprised silence in the cabin. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw 5 pairs of amazed eyes. "Do you speak Cantonese?" Liu Bingwen was the first to break the silence. "I grew up in Chinatown," I replied, still in Cantonese. "It's my native dialect, along with English." "And you understood our conversation all this time?" I could hear the confusion in Yin Lily's voice. I smiled. "Don't worry. My professional ethics do not allow me to disclose the content of private conversations of my clients. Consider me just a driver who happens to know your language." After a short pause, Liu Bingwen laughed. "What a surprise. In that case," he switched to Cantonese, "may I ask, where did you learn it so well? Your pronunciation is impeccable, with no American accent." "My adoptive father is from Guangzhou," I answered. "Although he was born here, 3rd generation, we always spoke Cantonese at home. And then there were friends, neighbors, The community. That's surprising, Sun Weiman shook his head. Usually, by the third generation, the ancestral language is lost. I was a curious kid, I shrugged. Besides, I've always liked to communicate with people in their own language. It creates a special bond. The atmosphere in the minivan changed noticeably. The Chinese became animated and started asking questions about my life, about Los Angeles, about how Chinatown had changed in recent years. The conversation was easy and relaxed, without the need to choose words or simplify phrases, as is often the case when communicating in a non-native language. "Have you been to China?" Zhang Meihua asked. "Twice," I replied. "In Hong Kong and Guangzhou, visiting distant relatives, and also in Shanghai, but not for long, for work." "And how do you like Shanghai?" "Impressive city, a mixture of ultra-modern architecture and colonial heritage. I'd like to go back for a more thorough visit." After a rather long pause, Liu asked me, "Mr. Holloway, have you been working in a travel agency for a long time?" "Occasionally," I answered honestly. "Mostly, I accompany business delegations." "And where do you work permanently, if it's not a secret?" I thought for a moment. I didn't want to lie, but it was too early to reveal the whole truth. "At the moment, I am looking for new opportunities," I answered diplomatically. "I recently left my previous job." "I understand," Liu nodded. "Mobility in the labor market is a hallmark of the American economy. In China, people are more likely to build their careers in one company." "Both approaches have their advantages," I agreed. Bingwen looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, Mr. Holloway, maybe we should hire you for the entire time we're here, not only as a driver but also as an interpreter. It would be handy to have someone who speaks both languages fluently and knows the city." I didn't show my surprise. "Actually, I've already been hired by your travel agency in that capacity," I replied. "I will accompany you to all the activities on the program, including business meetings if necessary." "Great!" Liu clapped his hands. Then we were doubly lucky. We drove up to the small but obviously expensive hotel where the delegation was booked. I helped with the luggage and escorted the guests to the front desk, where the receptionist was already waiting for them. "I'll be here tomorrow morning at 7:30, I told Liu when the formalities were settled. "Your first meeting at Bluestone Technologies is scheduled for 9. "Excellent," Liu nodded. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Holloway, and thank you for the pleasant company." As I left the hotel, I took a deep breath of the evening air. Events had taken an unexpected turn. Tomorrow I was to return to Bluestone, not as an employee, but as an escort for the Chinese delegation. How would my former colleagues react? And most importantly, how would Prescott behave when he discovered that his fired, incompetent employee was freely communicating with his Chinese partners in their native dialect? I got into the minivan and dialed Wei's number. "How was the meeting?" he asked without preamble. "Interesting," I replied. "They were happy to hear that I spoke Cantonese." "You bet they were," Wei laughed. "They specifically asked for an escort who spoke Cantonese, but I didn't tell you about it. I wanted it to be a surprise." "Well, it was a surprise," I grinned, "but tomorrow will be even more interesting. I have to accompany them to Bluestone." "Uh-oh," Wei said with undisguised pleasure. "I look forward to a detailed report. And by the way, were they satisfied?" "More than satisfied." "See? You doubted it." Wei sounded smug. "I told you it was going to be great." We said goodbye, and I headed home. On the way, I thought about tomorrow. Part of me was anticipating the moment when Prescott would see me with the Chinese delegation. The other part was slightly anxious. After all, I had worked at Bluestone for 5 years, and many people there were still my friends. At home, I tossed my keys on the hall table and made my way to the kitchen. I opened the refrigerator empty except for a couple bottles of beer and a dried-up slice of pizza. Getting fired had knocked me off my game, and I'd forgotten to go grocery shopping. Ordering delivery from a Chinese restaurant nearby, I settled down with a beer in front of the TV. The phone vibrated. It was Linda calling. I hesitated for a second before answering. "Hi, Marcus." Her voice sounded strained. "How are you doing?" "Fine," I answered. "How's it going in there?" "It's a madhouse," she sighed. "Prescott's got us all worked up about the Chinese delegation. He made us work weekends, double-checking every comma in the documents." "I sympathize," I said sincerely. "Linda has always been a good colleague, hard-working and helpful." "And that's not all," she continued. "Can you imagine he hired an outside translator? Some professor from UCLA, a specialist in Cantonese. Cost a lot of money, by the way." I whistled. "Really? Why? You have Mandarin." "That's just it," Linda exclaimed. "That's what I told him, but he said that, for the sake of protocol, we needed a Cantonese specialist. The Chinese demanded that the meeting be conducted in Cantonese, and we are too interested in this contract to object." I smiled involuntarily. Prescott was obviously trying to hedge his bets after my hint about Monday's luck. "How did Douglas feel about it?" I asked. "He's on a business trip in New York, so Prescott is still the rightful master of the situation." Linda was silent for a moment. "You know, everybody thinks he did you an injustice. Even Thompson, and you know how he feels about downsizing." "Thank you. That's good to hear," I replied. "But what's done is done." "Did you find something new?" "You could say that. I work for a friend's travel agency, accompanying delegations. It's nothing big, but it'll do for a while." After I talked to Linda, I sat staring off into space for a long time. Tomorrow promised to be an interesting day. On the one hand, I didn't want to cause trouble for my former co-workers. On the other, Prescott deserved a little lesson. In the end, I decided that I would act according to circumstances. My primary job is to escort the delegation in a professional manner. Everything else is just side effects. The food was delivered and I ate dinner, still thinking about tomorrow's meeting. Shanghai Technology Corporation was planning to purchase a license to use Bluestone's software for its production lines. The deal was valued at several $1,000,000, with the prospect of further expanding cooperation. I remembered how much time I had spent preparing these documents, reviewing the technical specifications, negotiating the legal language. Now it was all in the hands of Linda and a hired professor who may have been an excellent linguist, but was hardly versed in Cantonese technical terminology. As I fell asleep, I imagined various scenarios for tomorrow's meeting. In some, Prescott would turn pale and stammer when he saw me with the delegation. In others, he arrogantly ignored my presence. But deep down, I knew that the reality was likely to fall somewhere in the middle. And that's what made the day ahead so exciting. Monday morning was clear and cool. I woke up before my alarm clock, feeling strangely excited. Today was the day I was to return to Bluestone Technologies, the place where I had worked for 5 years, but in a completely different capacity. After showering and drinking coffee, I put on my pre-made suit. I meticulously examined myself in the mirror, adjusted my tie, and was satisfied. First impressions are important, especially when meeting former colleagues in a new role. At 7:30, I was already outside the hotel. Liu Bingwen and his team were waiting for me in the lobby, fresh and trim. Chinese businessmen are known for their discipline and efficiency. "Good morning, Mr. Holloway," Liu greeted me in Cantonese. "Good morning, Mr. Liu," I replied, bowing slightly. "I hope you had a good rest." "As much as possible on the first night after the flight," he smiled. "We are ready for negotiations." On the way to the Bluestone office, Yin Lily turned to me. "If you have any questions about technical terminology, don't worry. We'll understand without translation, so don't hesitate to ask." "No, they won't," I replied. "I am well acquainted with such agreements." Liu gave me an attentive look. "Have you worked in international contracts?" I nodded, deciding not to go into details. "I have experience in this area." As we pulled up to the familiar Bluestone Technologies building, I felt a slight pang of nostalgia. For 5 years, I had come here every morning, said hello to the security guard, and walked up to my floor. Now I was a visitor, a guest, and the feeling was both strange and exhilarating. I parked the minivan in the guest parking lot and led the delegation to the main entrance. We were met at the entrance by a security guard named Joe, who knew me by sight. "Marcus?" He blinked in surprise. I thought. He paused, noticing the Chinese delegation behind me. "Good morning, Joe," I said calmly. "I'm escorting a delegation from the Shanghai Technology Corporation to meet Mr. Prescott. 9 o'clock. Joe looked confusedly at his magazine. "Yes, the meeting is scheduled. But—" He hesitated again, clearly not understanding what was going on. "Was something wrong?" Liu intervened in English. No, nothing's wrong," Joe replied quickly. "It's just—" He shifted his gaze to me. "Marcus worked here until Friday." "Really?" Liu looked genuinely surprised. "Mr. Holloway, you didn't tell us that." I shrugged. I didn't think it mattered. I'm now representing the Golden Dragon Travel Agency. Oddly enough, no one greeted us, and we headed for the elevators. I pressed the button for the 23rd floor. There was a spacious conference room for important negotiations. While still in the elevator, I noticed that the Chinese were frowning unhappily. Not to meet the delegation at the entrance bordered on insult. When the elevator doors opened, I saw Thompson from the finance department talking to Audrey Mayfield, Prescott's secretary. Seeing me at the head of the Chinese delegation, both froze with the same expression of shock on their faces. "Marcus?" Thompson looked as if he'd seen a ghost. "Good morning, Cliff." I nodded as if nothing had happened. "Hi, Audrey. We're here to see Mr. Prescott." Audrey Mayfield, usually calm and collected, looked from me to the delegation and back again in confusion. "Yes, of course." "The meeting," she coughed, trying to regain her professional tone. "Unfortunately, Mr. Prescott is running a little late. We're having a little problem with the translator." "What kind of problem?" I asked. "Professor Lee from UCLA, who we hired specifically for this meeting, had a small accident on the way here. He's fine, but he won't be able to attend." I translated this information to Liu Bingwen in Cantonese. A look of irritation flashed across his face. "This is very unpleasant, Mrs. Mayfield," I said to Audrey, "but perhaps I can help with the translation if necessary." "Yes, of course." Audrey, in spite of her surprise, kept her composure. "Please follow me." On the way to the conference room, we met a few more of my former colleagues. Everyone reacted the same way. First, shock and disbelief, then embarrassment and awkward greetings. No one dared to ask directly what I was doing here with the Chinese delegation. The conference room was prepared for an important meeting. A large oval table, comfortable chairs, carafes of water, notepads and pens with the Bluestone logo. On the wall was a screen for presentations, and on the table were the technical specifications of the software the Chinese were interested in. Audrey seated the delegation and promised that coffee would be brought immediately. "Mr. Prescott will be here in 20 minutes, she said in an apologetic tone. "In the meantime, you can familiarize yourself with the materials." When Audrey left, Liu turned to me. "So, Mr. Holloway, you seem to know everyone here, and everyone knows you." "I worked at Bluestone for 5 years, I admitted. "And why did you leave, if it's no secret?" I hesitated to answer. "Let's just say that the new management decided that my position was not necessary." Sun Wyman snorted. "Downsizing? Something like that?" Zhang Meihua looked at me thoughtfully. "And now you are coming back here with us. How ironic." At this moment, the door opened, and Linda Wu entered the conference room with a tray containing cups of coffee and cookies. She was followed by 2 interns with folders of documents. "Good morning, gentlemen," she greeted the delegation in Mandarin. "Welcome to Bluestone Technologies." Then she spotted me and froze half-heartedly. "Marcus? Hi, Linda, I replied in English. I'm accompanying a delegation from the Golden Dragon Travel Agency. She blinked confusedly, then tried to pull herself together. Yeah, it's good to see you. I didn't expect. She turned to the Chinese and continued in Mandarin. Unfortunately, our translator is delayed, but I speak Mandarin and can help with communication. Liu Bingwen smiled politely but replied in Cantonese. Thank you for your concern, but we prefer to negotiate in Cantonese dialect as agreed beforehand. Linda looked at me confusedly. He says they prefer Cantonese, I translated. Yes, I understand, Linda nodded. But I don't speak Cantonese, only Mandarin. Maybe they'll agree. I translated her words to Liu, but he remained adamant. We insist on Cantonese. It was a condition from the beginning. We prepared all the materials in that dialect, and it's important for us to get all the nuances right. Linda looked increasingly confused. Marcus, what am I supposed to do? Professor Lee isn't coming, and Mr. Prescott will be here any minute. He was counting on an interpreter. I shrugged. I don't know, Linda. It's not my problem anymore. She gave me a hurt look. You know how important this deal is to the company. Can't you help? I pretended to think about it. I don't know. I'm on the other side now. The situation was getting more and more tense. The Chinese began to speak softly among themselves in Cantonese, not hiding their irritation. This is unprofessional, Zhang Meihua said. First they keep us waiting. Now they find out they don't have a proper interpreter. Maybe we should reschedule the meeting, Yin Lili suggested. And lose another day? Liu shook his head. We didn't come from the other side of the world to sit in a hotel. Linda, seeing the displeasure of the Chinese but not understanding half of their conversation, looked increasingly worried. What are they talking about? She whispered to me. They're not happy, I replied. They're considering canceling the meeting. Linda turned pale. Marcus, please, just for tonight, help us with the translation. Prescott will be furious if the deal falls through. I was about to respond when the conference room door opened and Jared Prescott walked in. As impeccable as ever in his expensive suit, he exuded confidence and power. Good morning, gentlemen, he said loudly. I apologize for being late. Traffic in Los Angeles is a nightmare. He glanced around the room and his smile faltered when he saw me. Holloway? His eyebrows went up. What are you doing here? Mr. Holloway is accompanying our delegation, Liu interjected in heavily accented English. Prescott looked from me to the Chinese and back again. I see, he said, quickly regaining his composure. Well, we are pleased to welcome you to Bluestone Technologies. He turned to Linda. Where is Professor Lee? He won't be able to make it, Linda answered quietly. A small accident on the way. Prescott's face contorted for a moment. And who's going to translate? We have a problem, sir, Linda admitted. I only speak Mandarin, and they insist on Cantonese. Prescott gave me a quick glance, then turned to the Chinese. Gentlemen, perhaps we could negotiate in English, or in Mandarin. Miss Wu has an excellent command of that dialect. Liu Bingwen shook his head slowly. We prefer Cantonese, he said in English. That was the agreement from the beginning. But under the circumstances, Prescott began. Liu switched to Cantonese. We insist that the original terms be honored. If you are unable to provide a Cantonese interpreter, perhaps we should reschedule the meeting or approach other potential partners. I watched this scene in silence with mixed feelings. On the one hand, there was some gloating satisfaction at the sight of a bewildered Prescott. On the other, I realized that the deal was important not only for him, but for the entire company, including my former colleagues. What is he talking about? Prescott asked, turning to Linda. I don't know Cantonese. Linda waved her hands helplessly. Prescott turned to me. Holloway, do you understand what they're saying? I paused, savoring the moment. Yes, I do. What are they saying? They insist on Cantonese and are considering canceling the meeting if you don't provide a suitable interpreter. Prescott clenched his jaw. Tell them we'll find a solution. I don't work for Bluestone, I reminded him. I represent a travel agency. Holloway, he sounded annoyed. This is not the time for... Liu Bingwen interrupted him, speaking Cantonese again. We appreciate your time, Mr. Prescott, but the issue of communication is critical to us. We are talking about a technically complex contract, and any misunderstanding could have serious consequences. Sun Wyman added, We are more comfortable speaking Cantonese. Prescott looked at them helplessly, not understanding a word. He turned to me again. I translated their words, trying to keep a neutral expression on my face. Contradictory feelings were struggling inside me. Part of me enjoyed Prescott's confusion, the man who had so easily labeled me incompetent and thrown me out on the street. The other part felt responsible for a project in which I had invested so much time and effort. The atmosphere in the conference room was becoming increasingly tense. The Chinese began to talk quietly among themselves, discussing the possibility of postponing the meeting or even canceling the deal. Prescott and Linda exchanged confused glances, not knowing what to do. Gentlemen, Prescott finally said, addressing the Chinese delegation in English, I sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding. Perhaps we could take a short break to find a suitable solution. Liu replied in Cantonese, We've already lost a whole hour. If you can't provide an adequate reception, perhaps we should reconsider the terms of our potential cooperation. I translated his words, and Prescott's face contorted with barely restrained rage. He realized that the situation was spiraling out of control, and a deal that had been worked on for months was in jeopardy. Holloway, he turned to me, lowering his voice. You understand them. Could you, help us out? Just for tonight. I don't work for Bluestone, I repeated. You said it yourself. I have no place in the company. That was a mistake, Prescott sneered. This was no time for personal insults. I looked at Linda, who was looking at me pleadingly, at the intern shuffling nervously against the wall, and felt a prick of conscience. Yes, I wanted to teach Prescott a lesson, but not at the cost of trouble for the whole team. Mr. Holloway, he said to me in Cantonese, it seems that your former colleagues are in a quandary. You are fluent in both languages. Perhaps you could help with the translation, as a neutral party. I hesitated. On the one hand, Prescott deserved this predicament. He'd created it himself by firing me. On the other, the deal was important not only to him, but to many of my former co-workers. The situation had reached a stalemate. The delegation sat stone-faced. Prescott looked like he was ready to explode with rage. Linda nervously fiddled with her pen. Everyone was waiting for my decision. At that moment, Audrey Mayfield entered the conference room. Mr. Prescott, she said, Mr. Douglas is on the line. He wants to know how the negotiations are progressing. Robert Douglas, vice president and Prescott's immediate superior. A man who, unlike Prescott, has always valued competence and professionalism. Tell him I'll call him back, Prescott replied sharply. He insists, Audrey objected. He says it's urgent. Prescott gave me a furious look, then turned to the Chinese. If you'll excuse me for a moment, he said in English, and followed Audrey out of the room. As soon as the door closed behind him, Linda turned to me. Marcus, please. You know how important this deal is. If it falls through, everyone will suffer, not just Prescott. I looked at the Chinese delegation. They were clearly annoyed, but they held their dignity. What do you say, Mr. Liu? I asked in Cantonese. Are you ready to continue the meeting? Liu looked at me thoughtfully. Are you ready to help, even though you were fired? I'm ready to help my former colleagues, I replied. I've been working on this project for several months, and I would like to see it completed successfully. Liu nodded. In that case, we agreed to continue negotiations, but on one condition: you will remain our escort for the rest of our stay here. It's a deal, I replied. Linda, who didn't understand our conversation, looked at me hopefully. Marcus? What's going on? They have agreed to continue the negotiations, I said. I'll translate. The relief on her face was almost palpable. Thank you, Marcus. You're a lifesaver. At that moment, the door opened again and Prescott came back into the conference room. His face showed that the conversation with Douglas had not been pleasant. Gentlemen, he addressed the Chinese delegation, I sincerely apologize for this delay. We greatly appreciate your willingness to cooperate. Liu replied in Cantonese. We accept your apology and are ready to continue negotiations. Mr. Holloway agreed to help with the translation. I translated his words and Prescott threw a mixture of gratitude and irritation at me. Thank you, Holloway, he said dryly. We appreciate your help. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. I'm not doing this for you, Mr. Prescott. I'm doing it for a project I've put a lot of time and effort into. The negotiations finally began. I took a seat between the Chinese delegation and the Bluestone team, translating from Cantonese to English and back again. Technical terms, legal nuances, financial terms, all required not only language skills but also an understanding of the contract. To my surprise, I found myself enjoying the process. Being an interpreter meant being at the center of things, controlling the flow of information, being an indispensable link between the two parties. It gave a strange sense of power, a power I had never had as a rank-and-file member of the International Contracts Department. Prescott, though clearly unhappy with my presence, had to recognize my competence. Every time I accurately translated a complex technical term or legal phrase, there was a flicker of respect mixed with irritation in his eyes. Linda, freed from having to try to communicate in an inappropriate dialect, focused on the documentation and technical aspects of the deal. From time to time, she cast appreciative glances at me. The Chinese were pleased too. They could freely express themselves in their native dialect without worrying about the language barrier. Liu Bingwen nodded approvingly several times when I accurately conveyed the nuances of his statements. By noon, we had made significant progress. Most of the disputed points of the contract had been agreed upon. Only the details remained. Prescott suggested we take a break for lunch. We can continue in the afternoon, he said. The restaurant on the first floor is at your service. I translated his words and Liu nodded in agreement. That would be good. But before we adjourn, I have one question for Mr. Holloway. He turned to me. We would appreciate it if you would remain our interpreter until the end of the negotiations, not just today, but throughout the week, with appropriate compensation from our side, of course. I translated his words to Prescott, who frowned. We can find another interpreter by tomorrow, he objected. Mr. Liu insists on my participation, I replied. They are already used to my style of translation and trust me. Prescott pressed his lips together, but nodded. All right. If that is the condition of the Chinese side, we agree. For the next 3 days, I lived in some kind of strange dream. In the morning, I picked up the Chinese delegation from the hotel. In the afternoon, I worked as a translator at the negotiations at Bluestone Technologies. In the evening, I accompanied the guests to a dinner or cultural program organized by way fatigue was accumulating, but along with it grew satisfaction. I finally felt truly needed, indispensable. After that stalemate on the first day, Prescott was forced to accept my help as an interpreter. He played it cool, but I could see that he was annoyed at having to rely on an employee he had fired a few days earlier. He was especially annoyed that the Chinese were addressing me directly instead of him, as if I were a full-fledged representative of Bluestone. Tell them that we are ready to discuss the terms of the phased implementation, Prescott said, and I translated, smoothing out his harsh tone and adding the necessary formulas of politeness accepted in Chinese business etiquette. Mr. Liu is interested in the timing of the training of their technical staff. I relayed the Chinese side's questions, omitting some of the skeptical comments that accompanied their inquiries. I became the bridge between two worlds, and both sides depended on my precision and diplomacy. It gave a strange sense of power that I had never experienced working as a regular contract specialist. Linda was happy that the negotiations were going smoothly and made no secret of her gratitude. Sometimes she stayed late after the meetings to talk to me. "You saved us, Marcus," she said on the second day. "Prescott will never admit it, but without you, the deal could have fallen apart." "I'm not doing this for him," I replied. "I'm doing it for the project and for the team." "You know," Linda lowered her voice, "everyone thinks he did you wrong, even Thompson, and you know how cynical he is." I shrugged. What's done is done. On the third day of negotiations, Robert Douglas, vice president and Prescott's immediate superior, arrived. A tall, trim man with a shrewd eye and impeccable manners, he immediately took the initiative. "Mr. Holloway," he addressed me during a break, "I hear you've done us an invaluable service." "I'm just doing my job, sir," I replied, "accompanying the delegation and translating. And, as I understand it, you're doing it splendidly." Douglas looked at me appraisingly. "Liu Bingwen spoke very highly of your professionalism and your knowledge not only of the language but also of the technical aspects of the contract. I was surprised that Liu had discussed me with Douglas." "We talked over dinner yesterday," Douglas explained as if reading my mind. "I flew in late last night and met him informally. He mentioned that you used to work for us." "Yes, until last Friday," I confirmed. "And what happened, if it's not a secret?" I hesitated. It seemed unprofessional to complain about Prescott to his boss, but I didn't want to lie. "Mr. Prescott found my position redundant in the restructuring of the company," I said finally. Douglas raised an eyebrow. "Really? Interesting." He paused. "Well, I'm glad you were available when we needed you. A fortunate coincidence." A spark of understanding flashed in his eyes, and I thought he saw the situation much more clearly than he was showing. By the evening of the third day, the main points of the contract had been agreed upon. There remained the formal signing procedure and the traditional buffet in honor of the successful completion of negotiations. All this was scheduled for tomorrow. "Tomorrow is an important day," Liu told me as I escorted the delegation to the hotel. "I hope you will be with us until the end." "Of course," I replied. "It's my job." "You know, Mr. Holloway," Liu continued, "we really appreciate your help. Without you, these negotiations could have gone very differently." "Glad to be of help," I replied sincerely. "I have a proposal," Liu lowered his voice. "We are planning to expand our presence in the United States. We need people who understand both languages and both cultures. If you are interested in a position in our company, let me know." That was unexpected. A job with a Chinese corporation? Maybe even in Shanghai? Tempting, but "Thank you for the offer," I replied. "I'll think about it." When I got home, I couldn't sleep for a long time. The events of the last few days had turned my life upside down. A week ago, I had been an ordinary corporate employee, but today, new opportunities were opening up in front of me, working with Wei, an offer from the Chinese. I was no longer defined by my position at Bluestone, and that feeling of freedom was both intoxicating and frightening. The morning of the fourth day began as usual. I picked up the delegation from the hotel and brought them to Bluestone. But today there was a festive atmosphere in the office. The conference room was decorated. The staff dressed more festively than on previous days. Even Prescott, despite his obvious displeasure at my presence, looked pleased. The deal that would bring the company millions was practically in his pocket. The contract signing ceremony went smoothly. I translated the official speeches, making sure that all the nuances were correctly understood by both sides. When Liu Bingwen and Prescott exchanged signed documents and shook hands, there was a round of applause. "Congratulations," Douglas said as he approached us. "This is an important step for both companies." I translated his words and Liu nodded. We look forward to a long and fruitful cooperation. After the official part, the buffet began. Employees and guests mingled, forming small groups. I moved from one group to another, helping with translation when needed. The Chinese kept a more relaxed demeanor than on previous days, allowing for jokes and informal conversations. I noticed that Douglas often found himself sitting next to Liu. They seemed to find common ground, discussing the prospects for cooperation and the possibility of expanding the contract to other regions. Liu spoke English quite decently, but with a terrible accent. Sometimes, being close to them, I could hear what they were saying. "Tell me, Mr. Liu," Douglas asked at one point, "how would you rate Mr. Holloway's performance as an interpreter?" Mr. Liu smiled. "Excellent. Mr. Holloway doesn't just translate words, he conveys meaning and context. In addition, his knowledge of the technical side of things has made our negotiations much more effective." "That's right," Douglas nodded. "You know, I was surprised to learn that Mr. Holloway is no longer with us." Liu gave me a quick glance. "Indeed, it is surprising." "There may have been a misunderstanding," Douglas said diplomatically. "A misunderstanding that can still be corrected." My emotions raged inside me. What did Douglas mean? Was he considering bringing me back into the company? Prescott, who had been holding back until then, suddenly took me under his arm and pulled me toward Douglas and Liu. "I hope you are pleased with the results of our cooperation, Mr. Liu," he said with a professional smile. I translated his words and Liu nodded. "More than satisfied. I am especially grateful that you have provided us with such an excellent translator." As I translated that sentence, Prescott's smile became strained. "Yes, we were lucky that Mr. Holloway was available," he muttered. "Not luck but foresight," Douglas interjected. "Wasn't it, Jared?" Prescott gave his boss a quick glance but didn't say anything. Douglas turned to me. "Mr. Holloway, may I speak to you privately?" I nodded, apologized to Liu, and followed Douglas to a corner of the hall. "I've done some research on you," Douglas said without preamble. "I've looked at your personnel file, talked to your colleagues. Everyone speaks of you as a top-notch specialist." "Thank you, sir," I replied, not knowing where he was going with this. "I also found out the circumstances of your dismissal." His gaze hardened. "Let's just say I don't agree with Mr. Prescott's decision." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I have a suggestion," Douglas said. "In light of the success of these negotiations and the clear need for closer cooperation with our Chinese partners, I would like to create a new department, a department for working with Chinese business partners, and I want you to head it." I was stunned. It wasn't just an offer to come back. It was a significant promotion. I don't know what to say, sir." "Say yes," Douglas smiled. "The salary will be considerably higher than your previous one, plus bonuses for successful projects. You'll have your own team and direct access to me, bypassing intermediate management. It was a chance I couldn't have dreamed of, but something was holding me back." "What about Mr. Prescott?" I asked. "He obviously wouldn't approve of this decision." Douglas waved his hand. "Jared is a talented manager, but sometimes he gets too involved in optimization and forgets about people. In this case, he made a mistake, and he'll have to live with it. After all, the results speak for themselves." I thought about it. The offer was tempting, but returning to the company after everything that had happened seemed strange. On the other hand, it wasn't just the same job. It was a new position, new opportunities. "I need to think about it," I said finally. "Sure," Douglas nodded. "But don't think too long. I want to announce the new department before the Chinese delegation leaves." We went back to the others. Liu noticed my pensive expression right away. "Is something wrong, Mr. Holloway?" he asked in Cantonese. Mr. Douglas has asked me to return to the company, I replied in the same language, to head a new department for Chinese partners. Liu smiled. Unexpected, but reasonable of them. And what did you say? I said I would think about it. What about my offer? Liu didn't look offended, but rather intrigued. I haven't made up my mind yet, I said honestly. I see. Liu looked at me thoughtfully. You know, maybe there is a third option. We could cooperate even if you stay here. After all, our companies are now bound by contract. I didn't have time to answer because Prescott came up to us. I could see from his face that he guessed the topic of our conversation. What are you two talking about? He asked with a strained smile. About future cooperation, I answered, switching to English. Yes, Mr. Holloway will be indispensable for our future projects, Liu added through my translation. Prescott pressed his lips together. Mr. Holloway no longer works at Bluestone, but we are grateful for his help with the translation these days. That may change, Douglas interjected, approaching us. I've just made Mr. Holloway an offer to return to the company in a new role. Prescott's face went pale. Really? That's right, Jared, Douglas replied calmly. I'm planning to create a new department to work with Chinese partners, and Mr. Holloway is the perfect person to lead it. But we've just completed a restructuring, Prescott objected. Creating a new department requires budget, resources, which will more than pay for itself, given the prospect of working with Shanghai Technology Corporation, Douglas finished for him. Not to mention the other Chinese partners we'll be able to work with more efficiently with a specialized department. Prescott looked like he'd been cornered. Of course, the decision is yours, he said finally. But I'd recommend that you analyze the pros and cons more carefully. I have, Douglas said, and the decision has been made. All that remained was to see if Mr. Holloway would agree. All eyes turned to me. I felt like the center of attention, and it was both embarrassing and gratifying. I appreciate your offer, Mr. Douglas, I said, and I accept it. Douglas glowed. Good. I knew you would make the right decision. Prescott looked at me with ill-concealed rage, but there was nothing he could do. It was his boss's decision, and any objection would only make it worse. Congratulations, he said through gritted teeth. I am sure you will justify the trust placed in you. Liu Bingwen, who was watching the scene, smiled. I am glad that our cooperation will continue, Mr. Holloway, now in a new capacity. Douglas raised his glass. I propose a toast to the new partnership and new opportunities. Everyone joined in the toast, even Prescott, though his smile did not touch his eyes. After the buffet, when the guests began to disperse, Douglas took me aside. I expect to see you in my office tomorrow at 9 o'clock. We'll discuss the details of your new position and the makeup of your team. I'll be there at 9, I said. One more thing, Douglas added, lowering his voice. I know that there's tension between you and Prescott. Tension, but I'm counting on your professionalism. No personal vendettas, no gloating. We're all working for the good of the company. I understand, sir, I nodded. I'll act in an extremely professional manner. Good. Douglas shook my hand. Welcome back to Bluestone, Mr. Holloway. This time, hopefully, for a long time. I escorted the Chinese delegation to the car. Liu stayed behind to talk to me privately. You made the right decision, he said in Cantonese. Although I'm a little disappointed that I couldn't lure you to our company. Who knows what will happen in the future, I replied. But right now, I feel I have to stay here. I understand, Liu smiled. In any case, we will work closely together, and you may have to come to Shanghai often. I'll look forward to that, I replied sincerely. When the minivan with the Chinese delegation drove away, I was alone in the Bluestone parking lot. A strange sense of déjà vu swept over me. Just 4 days ago, I had left this building with a box of personal belongings, certain that I would never return here again. And here I was again, but in a new capacity. I called Wei to break the news. "Really?" he exclaimed. "You got promoted after being fired? That's unbelievable." "I still don't believe it myself," I admitted. "But it's true." "So you're the big boss now," Wei laughed. "I hope you won't forget your old friends." "Never," I promised. "By the way, I think we should discuss the possibility of cooperation between Bluestone and your agency. Organization of business trips, cultural program for partners." "Sounds tempting." Wei was excited. "Come to dinner tonight. We'll discuss it." I agreed and disconnected. As I passed Bluestone's main entrance, I noticed Prescott coming out of the building. Our gazes met, and for a moment there was such fury in his eyes that I felt a slight prick of alarm. Then he turned away and walked quickly to his car. I understood his feelings. He had tried to get rid of me, thinking I was unnecessary, and in the end he had to recognize my value to the company. Moreover, I was now in a position equal to his own department head, reporting directly to Douglas. It was a blow to his ego and authority, but as Douglas said, this was no time for personal conflict. I had a new job, new responsibilities, a new team to form, and I was determined to prove that I deserved this promotion. I walked down the street enjoying the warm evening sunshine and thought about how strange life got sometimes. A week ago, I had been fired and considered it a disaster. Today, I got a promotion I never even dreamed of, all thanks to a coincidence and the fact that I'd been hiding my language skills from my coworkers for years. Perhaps my father was right. A person with languages is never lost, especially if he knows when and how to use them.